Hello, my name is Christian Hecker, and today we want to take a look at how you can use XFrog plant models or special ecosystem materials created by XFrog for Vue. And before we go into that, let's just take a look at where you can find me. My website, Facebook, ArtStation, DeviantArt, and CG Society. And the specs of my machine, so you have some orientation. It's not a high-end machine, but it's good enough to do the jobs I want it to do. So now, how can we apply XFrog plant models or foliage to our scenes? I have three examples that I rendered out, so you have an idea how this could look in the end. And the thing is that these XFrog plant models have a rather high polygon count and very high res, or not very high res, but good enough resolution texture maps. So the rendering of these models usually takes quite a bit longer than the plans that ship with the original version of Vue, and therefore, yeah, the render times are pushed quite up. So it's still a balance act to find out what suits your scene best. So generally, I would say go for the XFrog plant models, but if it's a forest far in the background, the usual set of plants that ships with Vue should be good enough to do the job, or even for mid-ground stuff. But like I said, the models by XFrog do have a significant quality advantage, but the disadvantage is that it takes a while to render them. And here another example. Now the tree models used here are a selection of different tree models, and we will take a look at that in a minute. And the variation of these different trees, sizes, and even ages creates a very, very good and natural appearance throughout the forest. And a bird view that shows again different kinds of trees, and even some of the autumn package by XFrog to bring in some color into the otherwise pretty boring green. And you can also see that there are different ages of trees. We have here some smaller ones, some young trees. Then we have some middle-aged trees, and some older trees that are larger than the rest of the trees, and that gives us a very nice natural appearance. Now, where can you find these XFrog plants? You can find these in the xfrog.com shop, and here you have a variety of options depending on what kind of model you are looking for. And right down here you have the ecosystem materials that we want to check out right now, and that makes it very easy to apply a forest to your scene. Now let's take a look into Vue, and this basically is the scene we have right here, the same camera angle, and that's how it looks in Vue. Let's do a quick test. The terrains are created with a tool called Gaia by Quad Spinner, and it's still in beta, but delivers some really good results and natural looking terrains. And as you can see, the preview render already works quite slow. That's because of the detail of the trees. Now, like I said, the trees and the foliage that comes with Vue is a little easier to render, but the overall quality of the XFrog trees just just looks more natural. And that's the scene we had in our big render right there. So let's go in and take a look at the materials. Now here you can see this one, this one, this one, and this one. All of them are ecosystem materials created by XFrog. Very easy to load into your material and to tweak for your scene. Now let's delete these so we can have an example. Now, to add an ecosystem to your scene, just load another layer, or to add this XFrog ecosystem. Here we go. There are different packages that come with the ecosystem. Here are the autumn variations, and here you can see what kind of tree models are included into that ecosystem. Now let's just add a European-based model collection and open it. Here you can see that it loads all the plants. And here is the added ecosystem. Now we want to turn off dynamic population because we want to place these ourselves and not by Vue. So here we have the different tree models that are loaded into our ecosystem. Now let's change up the variety a little bit to force a more natural appearance, or a more overall more natural appearance. Okay. Now let's just populate the scene, and we can see how it plants all over the terrain, which is something we actually don't want, especially not on these slopes. Now we go into the presence and play around with these sliders. Now tuning these scenes can let's finish this test render that we can see where the plants are, and it's, like I said, all over the place. Now to set up and tweak all this with all the sliders that define where the trees appear, that's a lot of playing around and to look at what works best. Now we can raise the density a little bit more, populate again, do another quick test, and we can see that the trees are only placed in more flat areas and not exactly on these hangs right there. Already a much more natural look, and I pretty much like the distribution of these already. So these were the adult trees. Now let's add some medium trees, and it's loading the trees into an ecosystem, and we have a second ecosystem layer with the medium trees. Again, disable the dynamic population, randomize these numbers a little bit to bring in some variation into it all, and again lower the slope constraint and raise the density a bit and populate. And we can see how all these Otherwise, empty areas are filled with smaller trees, and that will immediately create a much more natural look of our forest. Of course, the more ecosystems and the more trees you add to the scene, the more complex the rendering works, and the result is, of course, longer render times. But the variation in sizes and all that will make your forest look much more natural. Alright, now let's add one more additional. No, that was wrong. Let's load another additional layer with some young trees. Again, disable dynamic population, raise the density, define the slope range, and randomize these numbers a little bit. Okay, and populate. Now, since these models are a little smaller, we generate a higher number of instances throughout our ecosystem. Therefore, it takes a little bit to plant the trees and the models throughout the scene on the terrain. Now, maybe that's a little overkill, but let's try and render that one. Sometimes you even have to adjust the sizes of the trees a little bit to make it look right. But that always depends on the scene you're working on. And the smaller trees or the younger trees fill up the empty spaces that were left after we added the middle-aged trees, and it looks like a nice and lush forest. Overall, the distribution looks nice and quite natural. Now, to bring in some color, like in this example, you can already see that I tweaked it here a little bit, so it's not everything filled up with trees. So these settings, or to find the right settings, needs some tweaking. But once you found the right settings, you will be very satisfied with the results. Now let's add some autumn trees to bring in some color, and there we switch over to the autumn trees. Now let's use the adult versions to bring in some nice colored spots into the scene. Now again, go down with the slope range, disable dynamic population, create some variation here. And lower the density because we want just some smaller spots of color in that forest. And let's see how it works. Okay, let's try a test. And we can already see that there are some colored spots in there that loosen up the overall greenish dominant color of the scene. And it may not be super realistic, but I think, or I feel that adding some colors in there, makes the appearance of the forest look again much more natural and adds another layer of realism throughout the scene. And yeah, that pretty much concludes how easy it is to add XFrog ecosystems to your Vue scene and create some nicely natural looking forest to the scene, much like this one right here. And you can see here all these color spots from the autumn trees. They do add some additional color variation throughout the forest, and I think it makes it all look much more natural. So I hope that explains how it's done, and I hope we learned something. And if you have additional questions, you can always reach me right here. And I hope to hear from you, and yeah, talk to you later. Bye.